As you hopefully know, we just wrapped last year, at the end of last year, on our comprehensive plan update process. And we've now launched a 2-year process to update our land use and development ordinance based partially on many of those updates from the comprehensive plan update, but also we have some updates to fix some areas that either staff or stakeholders identified as problematic. Usually it's reorganization. So the last suite of updates that we covered in April were really focused on reorganizing some procedural chapters. This section of updates focuses on state law related changes. So the last really comprehensive update of the land use and development ordinance happened in 2012. And so we have about 10 years of updates that we need to codify. So that's really what I'm going to cover tonight. And then we've also, because we're in the farm zone doing some work, we're taking that opportunity to add in the agritourism provision that we had discussed with the community in 2018 as part of the comprehensive plan update. So what I'm going to go over in this presentation is a summary of the updates, why we're doing the updates, what the process looks like to revise, and also do a revision summary by the zone and chapter. So hopefully I'm focusing my attention tonight on the optional updates because that's really where we need the public feedback. But we do have the revised drafts available on the website. We have one-pagers, we have revision cover sheets. So everything should be pretty easy to access and understand what's actually being updated. So as I mentioned, the last really comprehensive update of the land use and development ordinance for Wasco County was done in 2012. And since then, we've had a flurry of state laws that have been revised or added to the land use planning program for Oregon. Really, a lot of these actually came out last year or the year before. So that's why we weren't able to wrap it into the scope of the comprehensive plan, and we're having to do it now. Most of these updates do impact our 2 resource zones, farm and forest zones. So we have the A1, we have a 160-acre minimum parcel size and also 40-acre minimum parcel size for the orchard grounds. And then we have 2 forest zones, F1, 80 acres and F2, 80 acres. Part of those updates are requiring us to add some definitions and update some definitions, and all the definitions for the land use and development ordinance live in chapter 1. So you'll be able to find that information on the project website if you're interested to see some of the alterations to that chapter. As I mentioned, there are several mandatory updates, and I'm going to do a high-level summary of what those are. But there are also some optional updates, specifically new uses for farm and 1 new use for forest zones that we really need that public feedback on. So we've got some polls in the process of this presentation. I've got polls on the project website. We're sending those out via every channel. We've got one that you can go into the vestibule of our office and just check a box if you're low tech or no tech. So we're really trying to get that feedback on the optional updates. And then another part of this state law update was in 2016, we received a grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development to get an independent audit on our farm and forest zones using something that the state created, which was the multi-county state model code for resource zones. So that audit produced some results that also have some suggestions for some mandatory and optional updates, and I'll cover that as we go. And then, as I mentioned, agritourism was something that we discussed with Wasco County residents and property owners in 2018 as part of the comprehensive plan update. And we're looking to add that in as a subject to standards use in the farm zone. But we've recently heard, I think not unsurprisingly, a lot of concern about wildfire issues. And so we're really looking to see if we could add some additional provisions, and we love public feedback on that. So the reason for the update, the primary driver this year is really making sure that our rules are consistent with state law. We do have to, when it's a requirement, so it's a mandatory rule, planners, when they're permitting, have to actually implement directly from statute. But we find that's confusing to the average person who's just going to the land use and development ordinance to understand what the rules are. So we think it's beneficial to include those laws and make sure it's all in the land use and development ordinance, just for transparency's sake, for clarity's sake. As I mentioned, there are some optional updates, optional uses that are permissible now in farm and forest zones. And so there is the potential to increase uses and activities for those resource zones. Naturally, we've had some changes for references to state law. State laws change, so we have to update those references and references between sections and things. So that's another key target of these updates. And then just generally, our goal with this process is to make this document a lot easier to read and use. So when we're able to, really streamlining, paring it down, and adding visual cues. So the last series of updates that we debuted, for example, chapter 2, we added a easy to read chart to really help summarize what was in that chapter and make it easier to use. So the revision process, as I mentioned, we really started this suite of updates around 2016 with that independent audit that was conducted of our resource zones. And also since 2012, staff tracks all those legislative updates. We make sure the current planners are aware of what laws have changed. And so we actively engage with the legislative process to make sure we're implementing exactly what the rule says. So a lot of the work behind the scenes has happened in the past, over the past several years, and we're just really now pulling it all together. We spent the winter and a little bit of last year pulling this together and getting these drafts prepared for the public to have an opportunity to have a lot of time to review these ahead of going into a hearings process. As I mentioned, the agritourism piece, we really covered during Wasco County 2040, specifically in 2018, talking to citizens about agritourism and sort of getting the finger on the pulse of what people really felt about agritourism and if that was something we wanted to pursue. And we did hear at that time, I think pretty overwhelmingly, that folks wanted us to pursue that. As I mentioned, this last year and a little bit of last year, we spent a lot of time compiling that information, analyzing the data, and then producing these drafts that are ready for the public consumption. And now, April through August is really our focused public review process, where we wanted to give a lot of time and space to read these drafts. This document is over 500 pages. We're dealing with probably for the year, I think about 150 to 200 pages worth of material. So we know it's a lot. So we're trying to roll it out slowly so everybody has the opportunity to really engage with the material and understand those updates that we're making. And you'll see this on the project website. It's a timeline, graphic timeline. What we've done is develop a series of icons so that you know visually very quickly the kinds of things you're interested in tracking and following, and you can look for the icon, and that's where you're going to find the drafts, the polls, the one sheets, all that kind of information. So as you can see, you'll see throughout the presentation, the brown icon with the open book represents the state law consistency and updates related, farm and forest related updates. And then the green icon with a sign and a silo and a barn represents the agritourism. And as you can see, we're rolling that out in May. Then we have all the way through August to get public feedback, and then the hearings process commences in September. As I mentioned, chapter 1 really goes hand in hand with these updates because we do have some new proposed uses and some new required uses that we need to add terms for those uses into this chapter. Most of the definitions are taken directly from state law. And then we're also taking the opportunity to add some new definitions for terms that weren't clear, that staff or citizens have flagged as like, I don't know what you mean by opaque, tell me what you mean. So we've added that definition, or tell me exactly what you mean by topography. So we've added that definition. And Then there are other areas where our definition started to stray from revisions to state law, so we needed to make some updates to those terms. Okay, so the first suite of updates, the first focused series of updates I want to cover is for the forest zones. The mandatory section covers both F1 and F2. So these are things that you're going to see in both the revised drafts. The mandatory things that we learned as a function of the audit, and also as things changed with state law, where there were some required uses that we needed to add to these zones. And one of the most significant ones for staff is our ability now to permit agricultural structures, because we know some people are actively farming in forest zones. So just like we permit agricultural structures in farm zones, we'll now be able to do that in forest zones. There are also a lot of forestry operation related uses that we needed to add in, and some transportation related uses that weren't in the current version of these zones that we are adding in. And you'll see that is also true for the farm zone. There was a law that was passed in 2015 that impacted the way property line adjustments are done in resource zones, again, farm and forest zones. Specifically, it closes a loophole that existed. So now property line adjustments cannot be used to create newly buildable lots. So you can't take a 162 acre parcel and give that 2 acres over to 158 acre parcel and then suddenly make it eligible for a dwelling. So you'll see that both in the forest zone and in the farm zone. And then another thing that you'll see throughout the revised documents is some moving around of uses where in most cases they have been dropped. Well, I don't know if dropped is the right word. They've been moved from a more stringent review process to a less stringent. So we have a few uses that were moved from a type 1 where staff is kind of doing a basic review to it's now permitted without review. Similarly, we had things that were in the conditional use category that were actually required to review as a subject to standards or type 2. So we've made those transitions, and you'll see those with some specific type of markup that we do have a key for in all these revised drafts. And then, as I mentioned, there's only one optional use update for the F2 zone in particular, and that's a provision that would allow for accessory forest dwellings. And I'm going to go into a little bit detail about what those are. So accessory forest dwellings are secondary homes, and they're specifically for properties that are actively engaging in commercial forestry. So the eligibility requirements really drive home this point. So it's not a more general accessory dwelling unit. It really is specifically for forestry activities and operations. And one of the other critical differences I think about this is that the primary dwelling, so the first dwelling on the house, and this secondary dwelling, both the residents need to be either the owner or a relative of the owner of that forest operation. There are also some other eligibility requirements that I think are really necessary to talk about because there are a lot of constraints given what our F2 zone looks like. So I mentioned already the property has to be engaged in a forestry operation. It has to be commercially logging, essentially. The secondary dwelling is required to locate within 200 feet of the primary dwelling. And there are really no options. That's just the way state law is written. The property has to meet minimum parcel size of 80 acres, but in a lot of cases, these will be very large tracts because the primary dwelling typically would have been permitted as a large tract dwelling, which is a 240 acre contiguous or 320 acre non-contiguous parcels. So we're talking about large 80 acres and over. The other critical thing that these properties have to meet in order to be eligible is to be within a rural fire protection district. And if you know anything about Wasco County's F2 zones and F1 zones, most of them are not covered by a rural fire protection district. There are only a few, mostly sort of around the Dalles area that maybe have Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue, for instance, fire protection, but most are in the ODF and W. So we did an analysis of these eligibility requirements and really only discovered about 22 existing properties that would be eligible. And a lot of it is because of this rural fire protection district requirement. Two other requirements that are in the revised statutes, the Oregon law, is that a deed restriction needs to be recorded at the time of development to prevent the property from being divided, basically to create two lots with a house on each lot. And then finally, the homes, neither one of the homes can be used as a vacation rental. So really, again, the point of this rule is to make it easier for family forestry operations to continue to grow and expand and to work. So at this time, I've got a really quick poll that I'd love for you to take. And it's on your screen now. Just so you know, this poll is also available on the website. And we're going to be sharing it out across Facebook. So if you haven't had an opportunity to take it, we'd love for you to take it now. And I'm just going to give a few more seconds. Okay, thank you so much. So we only had a couple people take the poll and we're split 50-50, which is not surprising. That's kind of the way things go in Wasco County. So the next thing I want to talk about are farm zones. And I want to first focus on the mandatory updates and then talk about all the optional proposals for uses. So like I mentioned, transportation was something that we needed to cover some ground and add some required uses for transportation. And a lot of these uses are really things that ODOT does in the landscape. And so it's moving trucks around the farm zone. But it also could be things that large scale commercial agricultural operations do in the farm space. So very familiar, nothing surprising with that. There was also a landscape contracting business that is a required use in the farm zone that we did need to add, and that was brought to our attention by that independent audit. I mentioned already the property line adjustments criteria that we're having to add into both the farm and forest zones. And I also like the forest zones we had based on the audit and an internal audit as well. We needed to move some of those processes around. One of the ones that's optional we're going to talk about are non-farm dwellings. It was a recommendation, but it's not a requirement. But most of them are requirements. So we did that work, and you'll see that in the marked up draft. Another thing that we did, again, to really streamline this document, make it a lot easier to understand, and also make sure we're keeping up much more quickly with changes to state law, is when our criteria was verbatim state law, what we put in instead is a link to that state law reference. So it won't be verbatim in the code anymore unless it's a unique Wasco County regulation. And it's just the case that state law changes a lot more frequently than our land use and development ordinance gets updated. So that's going to help also really reduce any confusion. And we hope give people a really good reference, a really good tool to understand the rules that we're required to implement in the farm zone. We're also taking it upon ourselves to add in state law references where it's relevant. So again, citizens and planners really clearly understand the nexus, like what's driving these rules. So this is my overview slide of what's optional, and then I'm going to go into detail about all these optional uses. There are 4 potential new uses and this is outside of agritourism. I'm going to get to that a little bit. So cideries, and cideries are basically like wineries where it's an alcoholic drink that's being produced from fruit. Guest ranches, which are slightly different than Wasco County's farm ranch recreation. Farm breweries is a new one, and then horse therapy counseling services. You'll see this is actually written into state law as equine, so they use the official horse title, but we're just trying to make it easier to understand. So, two other things that are optional are allowing land divisions that are under the minimum parcel size, so under that 160 acres, for utility facilities necessary for public service. And I'm going to go into detail in a little bit what that means. And then, as I mentioned, we have the opportunity, based on a recommendation, to reduce non-farm dwelling reviews from a conditional use to a subject to standards use. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. So, cideries, the proposal and the way it's written into state law is that they're a type 2 use. So they're not a conditional use. They have some standards. It's a staff reviewed process. And the requirements are really related to the size of the farm, where the fruit is grown. So you can purchase fruit from elsewhere, but it has to be within 15 miles of the cidery operation. So we're not talking about buying from somewhere else in the state or even Washington. It's really got to be local. And then there are some rules and regulations like wineries with the events and sales activities. Guest ranches, that's a higher, a more critical review where we really have to scrutinize protections of our resources and what the impact is to nearby farms or nearby forestry operations. So it's permitted as a conditional use. It can't be in federally designated wilderness areas or refuge areas or any critical environmental concern areas. And the property has to be 160 acres. It has to have a livestock operation. So really, we're talking about mostly South County when we talk about guest ranches. Can't be on high value farmland. Most of our bands of high value farmland, again, are in North County, but we do have some areas in South County that are high value. And then there are restrictions on the size of these guest ranches. So they can't have more than 10 overnight lodging units. There are some provisions for food service, so providing meals for the guests, but it's restricted to who else they can serve it to. So it doesn't become a restaurant, essentially. And that's essentially guest ranches. Farm breweries, again, permitted as a conditional use. There are capacity restrictions on the amount of beverage that's produced. And it's got to include at least 15 acres of on-site hop production. And so you can imagine this rule is really targeted for a lot of areas in the Willamette Valley where hop production is traditional. But it is something that we wanted to offer to Wasco County residents and farmers to see if that was something that maybe they'd be interested in taking on. And again, there are those restrictions on the events and the sales and activities. Horse therapy and horse counseling activities also permitted as a conditional use. There are the rules are less numbered than some of the other conditional uses, but it either needs to occur in an existing building built prior to 2018, or the new buildings really have to be incidental to some other primary farm use. So you're doing it in conjunction with crop production or livestock ranging. So it's not the sole business model for the farm. And then, of course, there's a requirement in state law that anybody doing this kind of work needs to obtain the appropriate and required licenses for conducting therapy and counseling services. So land divisions for public facilities necessary for public service. Really what this means is, and I'll give an example because I think it really illustrates how valuable this rule really is to Wasco County. We is in the process of expanding their sanitary waste facilities, and we looked at it several years ago, and the property that they wanted to expand to at that point in time, it's since changed, But what they wanted to do at that point in time was locate at a certain ranch, and it was A1 160. And we didn't have the ability at that time. They couldn't afford the whole ranch. They really only wanted the piece that would make up their pond, the lagoon. And we weren't able to do that because of the way state law is written with land divisions. So this law would really enable us to say, okay, Dufur, we can make, draw a circle around that facility and split it off from that larger farm, and everybody benefits because it really is necessary to the safety and health of Dufur area residents, and helping to solve some environmental concerns about drainage into 15 Mile Creek. So really, these types of projects are those big critical public health and safety projects like water and wastewater. So generally, staff's really supportive of this one, and we do see it happen, particularly because we're in a situation now statewide and probably nationally where we're starting to see a lot of aging with our infrastructure, particularly with water and wastewater. So this gives us a lot more flexibility. And then finally, I mentioned one of the things that we're looking at based on a recommendation from the independent audit was to reduce the review process for non-farm dwellings. So I want to talk about, because I know this is really technical, it's really plannery. So I want to break it down a little bit what that means. So non-farm dwellings are currently processed as a conditional use in Wasco County. And that means a few things. One, it's got 11 criteria that an applicant has to address to show no adverse impact. And the criteria is focused on things like farm and forest practices, some of our resources that we protect, so historic, cultural, archaeological, wildlife, habitat, also scenic and visual air, land, water quality impacts. So basically any applicant looking to do a non-farm dwelling in the farm zone has to demonstrate they're not going to have an impact on all the things that we value. We value in Wasco County. The second piece of a conditional use is that we can apply, we have the ability, and either staff or the planning commission has the ability to add some conditions of approval. So things that the owner or the applicant needs to do in order to be approved. And it's usually, these are contingency plans, so they don't necessarily happen before the approval, but the things that we would follow up on. And that's everything from limitations on size, what time of year it's built, the location, those kinds of things. So the option is to reduce that from a conditional use to a type 2 use, with the understanding that it also has to go through a special state. It has to meet some special state criteria that's a little different than other type 2 uses. And I've had the citation there if you're interested in reading verbatim what state law says. But basically, we have to address no adverse impacts to 2 criteria, and they're focused on farm and forest practices. So we're still going to have that consideration of farm and forest practices. We know that's really important to our farmers and our foresters to make sure that there's not any unnecessary conflict between them and folks who just want to have their slice of rural heaven. So we would still have that requirement. There are also some special eligibility requirements that go along with non-farm dwellings, and those would still be attached. But they wouldn't be subject to all 11 of those standards, and there's less discretion over those conditions of approval. So subject to standards tends to be a little bit more pass-fail than a conditional approval. So I have another poll to share with you. And this one will take a few seconds. This poll is also available on the website. And it just basically says, what do you think about some of these optional uses? So I'll give you a few seconds or so to tell us what you think. Okay, thanks so much. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the agritourism portion and then start to wrap up and let y'all ask some questions after this. So as I mentioned, we really focus a lot of attention. We did a visioning exercise for the comprehensive plan in 2017 and went around to 7 locations throughout the county and said, what do you want us to look at? What do you want us to focus on while we're updating this comprehensive plan? And something we heard pretty loud and clear was, and something we know from the data is farming it's tough to make a living farming, and some people really need more economic development options to diversify their income streams on farms. And so the request from the public was, planners, go out there and look and see what we can possibly do in the farm zone to diversify, and then let's take a look at it. So agritourism was one of those things that we identified really early on. And it happened to be that Travel Oregon was also doing a really big agritourism push statewide at that point in time. So it was a really trendy topic, and people were really excited about it. So as I mentioned, overwhelmingly folks were in favor of adding this provision to Wasco County. What agritourism basically means, because it's different than wineries, it's going to be different than destination resorts, which we're covering next year. But it allows farms to hold events and activities and invite people to visit on the farm. So I think how we see this happen a lot in Oregon are things like pumpkin patches or farm to table dinners or educational opportunities on farms, where members of the public are going on site to a farm and interacting with the produce, with a festival that celebrates harvests, those kinds of things. The provisions that are written into state law have some restrictions and conditions, and specifically the focus is access. So making sure we're not creating congestion and traffic issues, and that the farms really have adequate access and parking for the uptick in volume of people. Public health and safety. So a lot of that is going to be things like sanitary waste facilities and lighting and those kinds of things. Making sure the size is appropriate, and then the hours of operation. So we're not having things go into the middle of the night. We're really concentrating the hours of operation. And also how many days a year can, there are some restrictions on that as well. We did receive some recent comments, I think unsurprisingly, because we heard a lot about wildfire risk during Wasco County 2040, that some of our farmers and some of our citizens are really worried about this use and the increase potential it has on wildfire risk. And Wasco County has done a lot of work on wildfire over the last several years. We had a community planning assistance for wildfire project where experts came in and did a lot of analysis. We've leveraged that. We're currently undergoing an update for our community wildfire protection plan. So we have the data to kind of take a look at that and have a real conversation about that looks like. But what we need to hear from citizens, because this was not brought up in 2018, is how many of you are actually concerned about fire risk, and what do you think we should do about that? So one thing that we've thrown out there is that we could add a requirement to this use for a wildfire mitigation plan, and that could include things like a consultation with a rural fire protection district. It could require the property be within a rural fire protection district, because we see that with other types of uses. It could require on-site water storage. So there's a lot of solutions that we could potentially build into this to reduce the risk, but we really need to hear that comments, because again, this is something that the public has directed us to add. So if we make modifications, again, we want that to be public driven. I did receive another few comments where folks who are maybe living in some situations where they already have a lot of activity going on the farm are concerned about the increase in people driving by their house and creating noise and odor and all the things that go with added people on working landscapes. So one of the suggestions from citizens were that we should really add an additional notice. So like an annual notice where neighbors and adjacent property owners are made aware ahead of time what the activities are planned for that year. So they can kind of plan their lives around that. And this is something that we heard during Wasco County 2040 with signage, for instance, for special events that we've been coordinating with Public Works. So we do have some creative strategies around that, and that is something we can build into the criteria and requirements for agritourism. I have one more poll for you all to take. And this is asking what you think. If you think we should add that wildfire mitigation plan, you think we should add that annual event notice to neighbors, or maybe you think both, or maybe you think neither. So I'll give you a few seconds to take that poll.
Kelly, just a quick note that there was a request for some additional time on the polls for this last one.
Oh, certainly.
So, thanks.
And just a reminder to everybody who is either listening on the call now or is going to watch this and replay, because we are recording, these polls are up, they're live on the website, and we're going to have them up through August. So if you want time to think about it, you want time to read through the proposals, you don't want to make a snap judgment, you've got months to take these polls. And we do use them. How we use them is we share that with the Planning Commissioner and the Board of County Commissioners to really get the pulse on what folks are feeling. So I've got about 80%. I'm going to give just a few more seconds.
Kelly, there is one question in the chat that you could probably use that 15 seconds to add to. Amanda Hoey asked how to contribute comments beyond the scope of the polling questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
The poll doesn't cover that.
We love getting your comments, and we have lots of ways to do that. So thanks for asking that, Amanda. We love old-fashioned letters, so you're welcome to write us out or type us out a letter and stick that in the mail to our office. It's 2705 East 2nd Street in the Dalles, 97058. That's a great way. You can email us, and I think my email is spread throughout the website. I don't want to say it live, but you should be able to find it on the website. If not, we have a general email, and they'll forward that on to me and the other planner in Long Range, Isaac. We have a submit a comment function on Wasco 2040, which is we've converted to the Ludo Update project. So you can submit a comment that way. Really easy to do. It's just a form you can fill out. We also have an Ask a Planner function that we added new this year. So if you don't have a comment, but you have a question, you can use same kind of thing. It's a form you can fill out. Or we're happy to take testimony by mouth, verbally, but it needs to be done during these work sessions or during a hearing. Hearing's really the best because we're going to be sticklers about you stating your name for the record. But we can generally use the comments that come, over chat or over these events to help paint that picture. Okay, looks like everybody who's going to take the survey took the survey. And it looks like everybody attending tonight who took the poll is really in favor of doing both the wildfire mitigation plan and the annual notice. Okay. So the next steps for the land use and development ordinance update, this is a 2-year project, but we're doing the updates sort of together in batches. So the goal would be to do all the updates, most this year, which are mandatory. We do have some of those options, and get those done by December. So right now, I mentioned at the top of the presentation that we really tried to give the biggest window we could, given some of the constraints on scheduling, for public input. So we're really looking for public input between now and August. And we're going to use that public input to offer those recommendations from the public when we talk to the Planning Commission in August. And August is going to be the first time that we present those drafts to the Planning Commission. And we're doing that in a work session kind of format where it's a little bit less formal than a hearing. And we have more time to really concentrate on those optional pieces and talk about the public input. We then have scheduled Planning Commission hearings in September. We are going to have 2 separate meetings just because it's a lot of material to cover. So they'll be back-to-back, first Tuesday, second Tuesday of September. And then we've tentatively scheduled Board of County Commissioner hearings for October and November. So the last Wednesday in October, first Wednesday in November. And that gives us our 3 hearings that we're required to make any of these types of updates. So if you're looking for more information, as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, we really want you, about these issues in particular, we really want you to go to the project website, again, wasco2040.com, and focus on these 2 icons. Again, that open book and that the picture with the barn and the silo. And that's going to direct you to the state law updates and the agritourism updates. And you click on the icons, go to their landing pages. There's all kinds of information there. We've got a 1-page summary of the revisions. We've got the actual drafts, and the drafts have a cover sheet that explains the markups, so you know exactly what the lines mean and what the colors mean. And then a summary sheet that tells you by page and section the specific updates, and in some cases, what's driving the updates. So you can have references to Senate bills or House bills, for example. And we also have a virtual open house that's been launched that has everything for this suite of updates, the agritourism and state law updates, in one package with a slideshow that covers a lot of the material I covered tonight. This is an example of what the state law consistency and updates, so the farm and forest zone updates, looks like. And you can see, again, 1-page summary. There's drafts. We've got the chapter 1 draft separate. We've got the forest zone chapters coupled together and the farm zone chapter separate. They've got all got those cover sheets. There are the polls, again, the surveys. For the accessory forest dwellings, I mentioned we did some analysis with our GIS. You can find a PDF of that map there. And then on this page, we've also linked to agritourism, because we know if you're thinking about farm, you're probably going to be curious about that provision as well. You'll also see on all of the pages, like I mentioned, those functions to contact us. So if you want to ask a question, you just hit the icon, Ask a Planner. If you want to get emails from us, we send out emails with major news and events. You can hit that email updates icon and sign up for a notification email. You can, again, submit a comment that way. We've got events. And, I think one of the benefits, unfortunately, we'd prefer to be in person, but one of the benefits of doing everything virtually right now is that we are able to record these, so you can go and watch these whenever you want. We're going to have all the presentations, the Ask a Planner events, the virtual open houses. It's all there on demand, so you can spend time when you have time, rather than having to schedule your life around in-person meetings. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to members of the public who have joined us tonight. And you're welcome to ask questions either using the chat function, if that's more comfortable for you, or you can, I invite you to unmute at this point in time and go ahead and ask your question. If you're watching via our live stream on Facebook, also encourage you to go to the Wasco 2040 website, look for that icon, and you can ask a planner, and we will get back to you. So any questions that we have?
Let's see, I had a question about the accessory forest dwelling. If it's supposed to be for the owner or a relative, what happens if the relative dies?
Yeah, so state law is not clear on that, honestly, Sheila. The only thing that it's really specific on is that it can't neither one of the dwellings can be used as a vacation rental. And I think realistically, we know that's a code compliance issue. Like we don't, the law isn't clear on how we follow up on that and ensure that those things aren't being put on the vacation rental market. So
Right.
in that case, and we are a complaint driven county with code compliance. So we'd really rely on the neighbors letting us know.
Okay, and then another question on the map, the PDF map, when you show the 22 lots, there are 80 acres that are in a forest zone that have dwellings. Do you know if those are legal dwellings or?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So our analysis was a really high level. We just wanted to get kind of a gut check because we knew people would want to know how many places are we talking about. So we really tried to give you a down and dirty analysis. So what we looked at were all those eligibility requirements. So you had to be in a rural fire protection district. You had to be 80 acres. And also you had to have a dwelling permitted through that process. So we only pulled dwellings that were either permitted prior to 93, no matter how they were permitted, or that were permitted as a large tract dwelling, which is that 240 acre requirement or 320.
For the 80 acre minimum, is that like, this would be like one tax lot, or could it be two contiguous tax lots that equal 80 acres?
Yeah, so the way that the statute is written, it says lot or parcel, which means
Right.
that it's got to be one tax lot essentially,
Okay.
not a tract. So a tract would be if I've got a couple tax lots together in one parcel.
Then when you, in the forest chapter, it talks about for forest dwelling, you have to have a functioning on-site water supply. And would that be a well, or could it be stored water? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. So that actually comes out of a comprehensive plan policy. And it's related to our fire safety standards. So as I know you know, Sheila, and I know a lot of people listening will know, again, a lot of our forest lands are only protected by ODF and W, so they're not structurally protected. So we really need that water source to help fight wildfires. So it could be a well, it could be a tank, it could be a creek, it could be a river that runs through the property. I've seen all of those things be used to permit development essentially. It just needs to be in existence.
so how big would the tank be? It'd have to be pretty big, I take it, yeah.
I can't remember off the top of
Okay.
my head what the gallon. Angie, do you remember what the gallon requirement is on that?
I don't off the top of my head, but it's in our fire safety standards chapter, and
Yeah,
I
so in chapter
could
10.
pull that up if we don't run out of time. I could pull it up.
I
Okay,
could
that'd be
do
great.
like this, and then yeah.
It's hundreds of gallons if I remember
Okay.
correctly.
Then I had just one more question. I'll
Yeah,
start
of course.
hogging the thing here, but I was wondering, when you have cideries and breweries, and then you have marijuana as a permitted use in the forest zone, do you foresee at some point having like on-site marijuana sales or consumption, or is that something that's the state's looking at, or
Not to our knowledge, no.
not? Yeah. What did you say, Phil? Temporary, yeah, right.
Temporary.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge. I do know
Okay.
dispensaries are permitted in some of our non-resource zones.
Yeah.
And we've had some folks looking at one, I think in Walters Corner was one example where people thought about putting a dispensary, but
Yeah.
I've heard no talk whatsoever about hemperies in
Okay.
resource
Okay,
zones.
those are all the questions I have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sheila.
Kelly, there's a question, another great question from Amanda in the
Okay,
chat.
great. Let's take a look. So Amanda's asking, why are the elements from the farm management plan removed? And it's a mandatory change. We were informed by the independent audit and also the state that we were out of compliance with state law, and it was a liability issue for us. So we've significantly pared down the requirements of a farm management plan, and we have to go basically with what state law tells us. So that's why that's been modified. See,
She's got.
we've got another couple questions. What other conditions has the county considered or reviewed as to other requirements or criteria that may be considered for agritourism limitations or considerations? Are there beneficial examples from other counties similarly situated to Wasco County? This is a really great question and something that I appreciate the opportunity to address. So when we talked to the public about agritourism in 2018, we talked about all the different types of potential restrictions we could put on agritourism. We did all of that analysis at that time, and I can certainly resurface that if we have a lot of public interest. But the real clear message we got from the public at that point in time was they didn't want any additional restrictions, that they just wanted us to put in exactly what state law said into the code, and then for us to address issues as they came up. And so we took our marching orders from the public. If it's of interest, I can certainly resurface that. It is accessible. The website, we do have archived all the Wasco County 2040 content, but I can make some connections there so everybody can take a look at that type of analysis that we did. So we've got one more question. Given the challenges with enforcing current land use regulations already in place, does the county have the capacity to handle monitoring and enforcement of an added agritourism allowance? How would it be managed? What penalties would be in place if there were violations to best protect the community, especially in relation to emergency service engagement and infrastructure? And Angie, if you don't mind, since you're the department director and more directly tied to the code compliance program, I'd love to pass this question on to you.
No problem, and tell me if I misspeak about any of the proposed changes. So definitely agree with you that there are some challenges ahead of allowing those additional uses, and that is something that has caused us significant pause over the years. We do have limited code compliance capacity, and we are complaint driven, and we do have criteria in our conditional use provisions specifically to address nuisance related concerns, which would be things like traffic and noise and impacts to emergency services and other services that might feel the burdens of additional uses like that. We did hear pretty loudly at the public meetings that we won't know until we try, and that there are so many unpermitted commercial uses out there on the landscape right now that fit the definition of agritourism, that a lot of people think that these things are already allowed without review. And so it's interesting to kind of test the waters a bit to see, you know, what might be beneficial to our community and what uses maybe will not be. And that's why we're asking for feedback, is what are the things that matter to you all? Where do we want to script some of those things into the regulations? We're trying to balance the requests for these kinds of uses for quality of life and things like pumpkin patches and, you know, winery tours that include some food or some music that are beyond the scale of the wine clubs. I mean, these are things that people think are already sort of a no-brainer, and we're trying to make sure that we're accommodating them in a way that don't unduly burden the community as far as neighborhood impacts go, as far as our emergency services go. We have a really wonderful relationship with our fire board and all the volunteer fire chiefs, and it's not lost on us what the burden would look like for them. And we did specifically ask them for feedback. We do specifically ask them for feedback on all of the proposals that come through. And, you know, if they were to respond back and say that a proposal was too much for them to be able to handle, that's grounds for denial. We're not necessarily green lighting everything. And Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong there or misstating, but we do take those comments seriously when they come through, and we do specifically request them. So I hope I kind of answered it, but please don't feel like we don't care, or that, you know, we're encouraging things to occur in the community that would be harmful or detrimental. We're very specifically trying to take the information received from folks about what's wanted and what's desired and what would be beneficial to their livelihood, but also balance that with resource protections and the long-term quality of life issues like fire and water and emergency services and things like that. Again, that's why your comment is so encouraged and welcome. And this is the whole point of this process.
Yeah.
Is to hear
and
from you.
I would encourage more comments in writing. And if I know specifically, Amanda, for your part of Wasco County, you've been hit really hard by the fires, and I know this is a real concern for you. We'd love to hear that feedback and suggestions that farmers have to really strengthen these rules. And I think wildfire mitigation plan and the notice, those are two options that we threw out, but we do have enough time to kind of scrutinize those things again.
And I will submit comments. I am trying to keep this one to questions for you since it's a Q&A. I do have a follow-up question to what you had noted, Angie, in relation to the fire board. Does that include all of the fire chiefs for the rural fire protection district, or is that only a subset of?
Can you repeat the last word? Is that only what?
A subset of the fire protection district. So does it have all of the RFPD fire chiefs involved?
So our public noticing for proposed development and uses includes whatever district that project is impacting. That's where the notice is going. We regularly meet with and attend the fire board meetings, which includes those districts if they're able to participate in the South Wasco County Fire Board meeting or the North Wasco, depending on the location. We also work rather closely with the fire marshal, who covers some of those areas with less representation, and as well as Oregon Department of Forestry. So we try to cover it all, and it just so happens that we're also working on our community wildfire protection plan at this moment. And so we are talking with our fire partners regularly, and this is, if I didn't already say it, it's a priority for us to balance this carefully, because we know once we open that gate, so to speak, there are implications that are worth being very thoughtful and strategic about for the quality of life of our residents and the impacts to our service providers and, quite frankly, the families who are volunteering to provide these services. So if you have suggestions as to how to better do that outreach, or someone who maybe we need to reach out to that we hadn't thought of, please send it our way, because we do want to tread carefully here and balance to the best of our ability.
So we have a few more people on the call. Anybody else like to ask some questions?
I don't really have a question. I'm just going to comment that, I think wildfires are, as you know, it's a huge concern in the forest zone too. It's just really, I know the ag people were hit hard, and up by us, we had the big fire last year. It's just, so I'm glad that we're doing the, fire, whatever you call it, the fire prevention, whatever they call that.
Community wildfire protection plan. Yeah.
Okay.
And we actually have a survey now running for some strategies that we're discussing. So that's up. So you can take that and give us some input. We're launching a lot of that public input in this month. So if you follow our Facebook page, you'll see every day we've been posting Wildfire Awareness Month related posts. Because again, we do take this super seriously, and we know our residents really care about this. So I'm just gonna look here at the reference, Amanda's reference.
It's the reference to the winery restaurant, the addition of that, if that was a mandatory addition or if that's an optional addition that's been included in.
Yeah, that is mandatory. It was a state law update that we're required to include. So anything that's optional in the codes is got a squiggly underline under it. So it'll be typically blue and then have a squiggly underline. So it should be easy to visually distinguish what's optional and what's not. as you read through the drafts. You know, one good point about the winery provision, though, if you have concerns about that, I know sometimes we've had some code compliance related issues with wineries. We always have the option to add additional criteria to some of these uses, particularly when they're up in the subject to standards and conditional use realms. When they're outright permitted or a type 1, typically we can't touch them. But some of these uses, we have the option to add that additional criteria, because the rule generally in the state is we can be more restrictive than the state, but not less restrictive. So if you have concerns about any of these things that I'm telling you are mandatory, we can also receive feedback about adding additional criteria.
So, Kelly, can I go back to one question that I had asked, and that is the one in relation to what other requirements or criteria you considered, and you noted that the public feedback you'd initially received was, let's address those issues as they come up. Right. And as you're hearing issues around compatibility on the time of year to minimize the conflict with some primary farm use, as you're hearing concerns about management of basic infrastructure, water and wastewater, and concerns about emergency services capacity in certain areas, beyond the notification consideration and beyond a consultation with an RSPD, are there other best practices or considerations that you would consider as these are brought up as issues to address?
Certainly. I think some of that, so some of the public health issues, some of the traffic, some of the hours of operations already covered in statute. So those are things that the applicant already has to provide information, and then planners would review that and receive comment from our partners that we have to notify. So Angie mentioned we have to notify the rural fire protection districts. We have to notify North Central Public Health, who really does with sanitation in the county. So we rely, in these cases, we really rely on the experts to tell us when something is not going to be suitable with the landscape, or suitable with the time of year, or suitable given the infrastructure constraints. So some of that, I want to be clear, is already built into the agritourism provisions and criteria. But anything above and beyond what state statute requires, we would just need to know from the public, either give us suggestions of the kind of criteria you'd like to see us add, so we can have a public conversation about that, or tell us the topics that you're worried about, and then we can do some more research and present some of the gold standard criteria or regulations that we see statewide. So I don't expect, basically what I'm saying is, I don't expect the citizens to do my job for me unless you want to do my job for me and give me suggestions about criteria. But I need to know what are the things that folks are concerned about. So I've already heard wildfire, and noticing we moved to address those pretty quickly. We could expand or contract that. We're kind of fishing right now to see how many other people feel about those things before we invest a lot of time proposing actual language. And that would be the same thing for other issues. So if you were really worried about sanitary waste capacity and didn't think state law provisions covered that, we could do more work on that to see what other places have done. But we need to hear that feedback. Hopefully I answered that, Amanda. Any other questions? Isaac, do we have anything on the Facebook? No, okay.
Nope, nothing's come in for the Facebook yet.
Okay, great. One thing I want to mention is we're doing an Ask a Planner event next Wednesday from 6 until 7. It's virtual again. We're going to be, last the last one we did was via Facebook. We're going to be streaming on Facebook, but doing a Zoom platform so that people can actually call in, because we want to make sure folks who don't have access to a computer can participate. But that's another opportunity to ask questions and we'll answer. So if you want us to do some deep diving over some of these criteria issues and come back with an answer, let us know. You can use the Ask a Planner function on the website. You can send us an email. A letter is not quite enough turnaround time, I don't think, unless you got it in the mail tonight, for us to get it in time. But use those functions. We can do a little bit more research over the next couple of days and come back. I also want to state that any of these questions that I'm receiving or Isaac's receiving, we are trying to stick up in our FAQ section on the project website so that everybody can benefit from these wonderful questions that we've been getting in from citizens. Any other questions that folks would like to ask? We can also take comment too, if you'd like to make a comment at this point in time about any of the proposals. Keep in mind that we're going to be accepting comment over the next several months. So this isn't your last opportunity. You've got plenty of time to send us written comment or participate in the hearings process. And we hope the feedback that we're getting in between now and August, we're going to be able to produce some additional options above and beyond the drafts that you're seeing. But we're going to try to be as transparent about any of that as possible. So you'll get to see the staff version and then anything that we add on based on public input. Anything else from anybody?
I'm sorry to keep going back to this one, Kelly.
Okay.
This is Amanda. So in relation to, I guess I'm a little bit stuck on this, addressing issues as they come up. And as we begin to surface these, what would be an expectation for a timeline to, because I don't think I would do your job well at all. So I'm looking to what would be the time frame for being able to look at some of those gold standards as these issues surface, because we can certainly propose things, but you'll have thought through the implications of those a lot more readily and have examples from other counties that have experience with putting in agritourism, not necessarily valley side, but hopefully something more east side that is more comparable to Wasco County.
Right. So the benefit of agritourism in particular is that we already did a lot of the work several years ago. So we already have a good breadth and depth of understanding of what the issues are statewide. Most of our counterparts who are doing agritourism on the east side are in Central Oregon. We see less of that kind of activity in Northeastern Oregon. But we also have really great relationships. Angie in particular has really great relationships with planning directors statewide. And we're I think, a really tight network of folks that love to help each other. So luckily, the turnaround time can be pretty quick for us. In addition to that, we're scrutinizing some other agricultural related issues for next year. And so we're already doing a wide amount of reading of literature around agricultural related issues. That we've got a repository of that information. And also I should mention that we have really great contacts within the Department of Land Conservation and Development who are experts in this field, and also the Oregon Department of Agriculture. So we've got a good network of support to turn around these things pretty quickly. And when I say pretty quickly, I mean, a month, 2 months. That's quick. That's quick for government, I think.
I appreciate that, and I also appreciate taking the appropriate amount of time to look at it. I don't expect that to be shorter than a month. I'd want it to be thorough, so and well thought through. Thank you.
I just want to give a few more minutes if anybody else wants to ask any questions. If you don't want to speak on camera, you're welcome to enter it in the chat, and we'll read it out loud. Okay, I'm not hearing any more or seeing anything else come out. So I'll again plug the opportunity next week to hang out with us, the three of us again next Wednesday for a Q&A session. We'll have some prepared questions, but we'd also, if you've got more questions, fire away. Use our Ask a Planner or email us. We love to get your questions. We love to take the time to give you thoughtful answers. And we love to share that with the public too, because for every question that you're brave enough to ask, there's probably, at least a handful of other people wondering the same thing. So it's really helpful for us and really helpful for the community to hear those questions. So come join us next Wednesday. Again, Zoom's going to be option. We're going to be streaming Facebook and monitoring Facebook. So if you're more comfortable participating on that platform, you can. The next series of updates that we're going to be doing is the environmental protection districts, or the overlay zones. So you'll see another round of these types of meetings coming up at the end of the May, beginning of June. And then just keep in mind that this has been recorded, so we're going to pop that up on the website and on our YouTube channel. All of these meetings, again, are going to be on demand, available from May until August. The polls are going to be available May to August. So lots of time to look at the documents, read through carefully, come up with great questions, participate, send us comments. Because I want to stress that the mandatory stuff, we don't have any options over. That's why we focus so much attention on the optional updates. And planners really, there are some things we think are good rules, like the land divisions I mentioned. We think that's really helpful because it would have solved the problem we had with DUFR. But generally, what we really want to see are optional uses added that the community really wants, that you think will help enhance our shared amazing county of Wasco County. So helping your neighbors, helping yourself. We really want to take the time to hear from you what your value is. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, a lot of these new uses happened after we'd already scoped Wasco County 2040, or we would have had much bigger, robust conversations, but like we did with agritourism, but lots of time. So we encourage you to also let your friends and neighbors know we're going through this process, and they have lots of time to look over the drafts, because we know that can get frustrating when we get to September. I want to make it clear, and I'm trying to make clear at all these meetings, when we get to the hearings process, these packets are going to be humongous. They're going to be 600 to 800 pages likely, just because of all the chapters that we're having to address, the staff reports that we're having to do, the meeting minutes and things that we need to include. So we really want to encourage people to participate now, get to read the drafts now, have a really good sense, so that they feel comfortable when we get to the legislative process and having hearings. I don't have anything else to add tonight. I really appreciate those of you who were able to attend or are watching on the live stream. Thank you so much. Again, your feedback is really what drives this engine and is going to drive this process. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules when the weather's beautiful to listen to us talk about planning issues. Thanks for caring. And if you need anything, you have questions, get a hold of us. We want to hear from you. Send us comments, send us emails. Angie, is there anything you would like to say to sign us out here tonight?
Well, thank you for that. I would just reiterate the thank you. I know you all have busy lives of your own, and this is not the most fun thing in the world to talk about, but it does carry implications for you all moving forward. So I appreciate your attention. I appreciate your willingness to participate, and some of you have been hanging in with us for a couple of years now of public process, and I sincerely thank you for that. It's been a long road. I would encourage you to share this video. We have a Facebook page. We do have a social media platform, but as a government agency, we can't blast things all over the place to everyone. So we kind of rely on y'all to share this where you can and where you think it's appropriate, and where folks are present that maybe we can't reach. So feel free to plug us away in anything that you think would be relevant. Like Kelly said, there's a lot of information, which is why we built in so much time for folks to be able to review it on their own on our website. And if you need any special accommodations, if you need to review a hard copy, if you want to talk through it with the planner, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here. We understand how difficult it is. You know, we're in a pandemic. This is a weird time and kind of a tough time to be doing work that carries so much of a lasting impact. So certainly appreciate that and want to make ourselves available to you all. And all of our contact information is available on our website, but you're always welcome to reach out to any of the three of us as individuals, but any of the members of the team that you might catch on any given day. We're all prepped and ready and looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you, Kelly, for the presentation tonight. Thank you all for participating and the great questions and the feedback. Like Kelly said, the polls are going to be available on our website for a long time. And if you have anything to add beyond that or suggestions for how to think about those questions differently, like Amanda shared tonight, we want to hear about it. So don't hesitate to reach out. This is very much part of our plan to ensure our ordinances and comprehensive plans are all addressing our community's needs and goals for their future. So please reach out if you need anything. And with that, I'll stop talking. Go enjoy the sunshine while the sun is still shining. It's beautiful outside.
Thanks so much, everybody. And we hope to see you next Wednesday for our Ask a Planner session.